Episode 4. Separation Spreads from Eden to Babel. After the promise is spoken in the ruins of the garden, the story of humanity does not stabilize. It accelerates. What begins as a single act of rebellion becomes a pattern. Separation from God does not remain private or contained. It spreads outward into families, communities, and eventually entire cultures. This episode explains why the Bible turns dark so quickly and why that darkness matters for the rest of the story. The first brothers, worship, and the heart. The first generation born outside the garden brings the first recorded act of violence. Cain and Abel both bring offerings to God. On the surface, this looks hopeful. Humanity is still reaching toward God. But Scripture reveals something deeper. God regards Abel's offering, but not Cain's. The issue is not the type of offering alone, but the heart behind it. Cain becomes angry, not at himself, but at God and his brother. God warns Cain gently. Sin is crouching at your door, but you must rule over it. Cain refuses, and with that refusal, separation moves from inward fracture to outward violence. Cain kills his brother. What began as autonomy becomes bloodshed. This is the Bible's first clear warning. Sin always spreads if it is not mastered. Civilization without God. Cain's descendants build cities. They develop culture, tools, and technology. On the surface, progress continues. But something is wrong. Violence is normalized. Pride increases. Power replaces humility. One descendant, Lamech, boasts of killing a man and demands vengeance far beyond justice. Humanity is advancing, but not healing. The world is not drifting toward God. It is drifting away. The flood. Restraint, not erasure. Eventually, Scripture tells us that every inclination of the human heart was only evil continually. Violence fills the earth. The vulnerable are exploited. Evil becomes entrenched. This leads to one of the most misunderstood events in Scripture, the flood. The flood is not described as God losing patience. It is described as God restraining evil. God preserves humanity through Noah, not because Noah is perfect, but because he is willing to walk with God. The ark is not merely survival. It is preservation of the promise. And after the flood, something important happens. God limits human lifespan. This is mercy. Evil is no longer allowed to entrench itself forever within the same generation. Death becomes a boundary that restrains corruption from becoming eternal. The flood resets humanity, but it does not cure it. The same problem repeated. After the flood, humanity receives a clear command: spread out, fill the earth, steward it. Instead, people gather together and build a tower. At Babel, humanity seeks unity without God. They do not deny Him openly, they simply sideline Him. They build a name for themselves. They centralize power. They resist dispersion. This is Eden all over again. Autonomy, self-definition, control. God intervenes not by destruction, but by division. Languages are confused. Nations are scattered. This moment explains something crucial. The fractured world we live in is not accidental. Cultural division, misunderstanding, and conflict are part of the story Scripture is telling. Human unity without God always becomes oppression. What is often missed? One detail is often overlooked. God's actions are consistently restraining, not annihilating. Cain is marked, not killed. Humanity is preserved through the flood. Babel is scattered, not destroyed. God is holding evil in check while protecting the promise spoken in Eden. Judgment in Scripture is never impulsive. It is measured. It is purposeful. And it is always paired with preservation. Why this episode matters. This episode answers a critical question. Why doesn't God just fix everything immediately? Because the problem is not environment. It is the human heart. Left to itself, humanity does not drift back toward God. It recreates Eden's mistake in new forms, through power, pride, and self-rule. The Bible is not pessimistic about humanity. It is realistic. And realism is what makes redemption meaningful. The story so far. By the end of this episode, the world is fractured, spiritually divided, culturally scattered, morally corrupted. And yet, the promise remains. God has not abandoned humanity. He is narrowing his focus. The next movement of the story will surprise us, not because God changes his plan, but because he chooses to work through one family.